The submittals process in construction can be a little bit confusing, especially if you have a lot of different stakeholders, multiple versions of documents, everything flying by over email. There's a high chance that you're going to miss some important information. Instead, imagine that you had an easy-to-use system, a place that stored all your documents, all of your submittals tied to your submittal packages, tied to the original specifications, and everybody on the job knew exactly what was needed from them at the right point in time. Hey, I'm Dan Lehman from Crewmatic.com, and we help construction, skilled trades, and home services businesses build systems that actually work for them. Oftentimes we see companies who find software and then feel like they have to shoehorn all of their business processes into that software instead of the other way around, where we build a system around your business. So most of you are familiar with the submittals process, but in case you're not, let me give you a quick analogy. Imagine my wife is out picking a new car, and I'm the one who's coordinating with the dealer. She sends me texts and screenshots, links to models, color preferences, safety features that she wants, and I relay that information to the dealer. He texts back images, brochures, spec sheets, then I send those to her, get her feedback, and we go back and forth a few times. In this case, my wife is acting as the architect or owner. I'm standing in as the general contractor, and the car dealer is acting as a subcontractor or a vendor. All of the photos and information we send back and forth, those are the submittals and revisions. So now imagine we're doing that across hundreds of products, dozens of different buildings, and multiple teams, and you can see how complicated this can get. That's why having a real submittal tracking system matters. Okay, so let's talk about how we might design one of these submittal systems. Today we're using a tool called Airtable. Airtable lets us create our own databases and customize it the exact way that we want. We can add any custom fields and create our own automations. Now this is a little bit different than using an off-the-shelf software. That off-the-shelf software might work automatically, but then you typically notice some areas where you can't necessarily make it work for you. So we're going to be digging into Airtable, but we can be doing this in a lot of other systems as well. First, let's talk about the different tables, or essentially the different collections of records that are going to make up this submittal software. It's important to note that as we take a look through these tables, they're going to appear essentially as spreadsheets, but our end product is going to be a lot more powerful than just a spreadsheet because it's essentially our own custom software. So the first table that we have here is companies. These are going to be all the different kinds of companies that we interact with. This could be general contractors, subcontractors, vendors, architects, anybody that we're working with on the project. And then likewise, the contacts are going to be all the people that are working at any of those companies. Our projects are going to store all the high-level information about the project, and they're going to connect to a lot of those other companies or contacts. So here you can see that we've got our general contractor, our architect, our engineer, and we're storing information at a high level about that project. Here we've got specification sections. You'll notice that I have these grouped by our project right now. And so we have our individual spec codes. We can have any descriptions of this. And this is essentially what's governing what we need from the submittals, right? We write specs, and then we're going to get submittals back that are tied to the specifications that are created for us. And then finally, we have our submittals, which are essentially the most important record that we have in this submittal system. So we can group them by the package. They're tied to the individual section. We've got it for the subcontractor and who's submitting all that information. And this is where we're actually going to do things like upload attachments. So let's get out of this back-end data view and head into our actual interface. This is going to be the primary way that we interact with our data. So I'll click on interfaces, and I've created one here that lets us view essentially all the different aspects with this. Now, in the beginning intro section, you saw this overview dashboard. And the great thing is that we can create any kind of charts or dashboards against the data that we already have in the system, and we can even drill into that. So here we can see all of our submittals. We can see the distribution of the different statuses. If I want, I could click into this and look at all of the submittals that have already been approved. We drill into those records. So managing data out of a dashboard as opposed to just a long spreadsheet with a whole bunch of values makes it so much easier to get at the data that we really want. In addition to viewing information about the submittals themselves, we could scroll down and also have information about the packages. So maybe if we come over to all records and we can filter this in different ways, now we can see, hey, what's happening with our packages? When are they being submitted? So maybe we try to get them at a certain cadence that we schedule them out. And we can view all this information in pivot tables as well. One of the things I forgot to show you when we were looking at the backend data is that we can also create additional views. So instead of just looking at this as a grid of our data, we could also set up a calendar of our submittals. So now we can color code this by the status, and see when everything is being submitted so that we can try to get a better cadence to what's happening with our submittal schedule. Back on our interfaces, after we've taken a look at the dashboard, you also might want to have a submittals log. Now, a submittals log is going to show you the history of all of the different submittals. Here you can see we've got them grouped by the status. So you might want to say, hey, after they've actually closed, I don't want to worry about them anymore. Let's put them out of sight, out of mind. But essentially, we can view this however we want to be able to see all the pertinent information, get access to the submittals. We can open any of these, so it's going to pull open that summary view of the submittals. And then the most important screen is going to be around this submittal package review. This is where we have our submittal packages. We can create new ones. And so if we're taking a look at a package, we've got a button up here to be able to submit the package. When we do that, that's going to flip this automatically, kick off any automation. So for example, it's going to change the status. We could also trigger notifications that it's been submitted so the person reviewing it is automatically notified. But some of the things that I think you'll find really helpful are that because this data is all interlinked in a database, it's not just separate spreadsheets and emails. Now, if we want to see information about this subcontractor, for example, I can just click on this and it's going to open up that subcontractor's information. And this can be configured however you want. So we can do that both with the subcontractor and we can pull open information about the project. Any of these linked records give us really a lot of flexibility to make this easily accessible all in one place. If we scroll down, we've got the individual submittals. Remember that we're looking at the packages here. And in the individual submittals, this is what ties to those specifications. So again, we could drill into these records. We could open them up individually if we're reviewing them. We can also see the specification that they're tied to. And so we can make all of those changes so that you don't have to go hunting around the system and you don't have to go searching into your emails to find all of the relevant documentation. So a couple of questions that we get from clients where we're building these submittal systems for is that, hey, this is great that now we have this really organized system to manage all this information. But at the end of the day, I still need to be able to assemble these PDFs, all the submittals, take them together and create one package to make it really easy to be able to see it in one place. So up here you have this package PDF. And what we can do is we can create an automation that takes all of the submittals, takes those documents, and then we use a tool called Docs Automator. And Docs Automator allows us to create a trigger on the back end that sends all of those PDFs, all of the different images and things that we get, takes those specs and compiles them into one document. And then we can take that and automatically write it back into Airtable. So now we've got this nice compiled document as opposed to a series of individual documents. Another question that we get is, hey, this works well for our internal stakeholders, but we want to make sure that we can get access to all of the different companies, all the different subs that we're working with, even if we're not licensing them as users. And that's where it's going to be really helpful to have forms. Airtable has its own form builder that you can open up to people and people can submit information through forms. And then we also work with this tool called Fillout. We work with fillout.com on about 80% of our projects because it integrates really well to these no-code tools. It makes it easy to do a lot of things like validation of information, auto-completing addresses. There's a lot of great features. So don't be worried about having to license all of these different users. We make sure that everybody can get access to the information that they need without having to license everybody separately. And the last thing I want to show you, this is one of the reasons why it's so helpful to use kind of a no-code or visual automation tool like Airtable as opposed to off-the-shelf software, is around its power of automations. So let me click here out of my interface and go into automations. And I'm just going to give you a couple ideas of what we can do here. So one would be when a record matches conditions. So when we get a submittal package and when that status has changed to submitted, well, now we want to notify somebody. So here's where we could send a notification. We can use different internal chat platforms or send an email, do whatever is easiest. And we can send it to one email address if you always have the same person approving. Or we can do this dynamically. And so if you have an assigned individual for this specific specification, then you can send it to them specifically. Another automation we might want to create is around establishing an SLA process to make sure that we're getting to all of those submittals in a timely fashion. So this automation, what we're doing is we're putting on some conditional logic to say, hey, if that submittal, if that date submitted has been, let's say, 10 days ago, and if the submittal is still in status of submitted or in review, meaning it hasn't been approved, it hasn't been conditionally approved, it hasn't been rejected, it's just sitting there, then if it matches that criteria, Now we can do any of our actions, like we might want to assign it to someone else to escalate it, or we might want to send an email, any number of things to keep that process moving along. And our last one here is generating any kinds of documents that we need. So if our status is submitted on our submittal package, again, we press that button, changes it to submitted. Now we want to go ahead and run a script to trigger that docs automator. Docs automator is going to take all of those different attachments that we need, compile them together, send the information, and now we have this one document. If you found this video useful and you need help designing systems around your business, don't hesitate to reach out to our website at crewmatic.com, where we're offering free 30-minute consultations.